Unfortunately, our camera has just died, so we're going to have to film just her today. If you haven't seen her latest video with us that was 6 months ago, please go to the description to watch it. I have just finished the ketogenic diet. I had an incredible experience on it after just 2 months of doing it. My cholesterol levels were great. I went and got those tested. My sleep was better, my mood was better, and my energy levels were better.
Well done you for doing the ketogenic diet. I think the ketogenic diet is probably the starting point for treating almost all conditions of Western that rise from modern Western life, because 99.999% of the population run their body fueling with sugars and carbohydrates, and that has potentially, it does have disastrous effects on health in the long term. And in fact, we know now that Western diets explain the current epidemics we're seeing of heart disease, of cancer, and dementia. So the ketogenic diet is the evolutionary correct diet, and as we get older, arguably we should all be eating more ketogenic, because running on sugars and carbohydrates is enormously damaging to the body. Now, very often people say to me, oh, but primitive man, he had carbohydrates in his diet, didn't he? And the answer is yes, he did, but only for a limited window of time. When the autumn harvest came and there was a bonanza of bananas and potatoes growing and grains and whatever, yes, he would have switched to running on sugars and carbohydrates, because eating those foods makes us fat. If you eat a sweet food or a high carbohydrate food, it spikes blood sugar. If you spike blood sugar, you pour out insulin, and insulin brings sugar down by shunting into fat. Now, gaining weight and becoming fat conferred huge evolutionary advantages for the winter, because fat is insulating, so primitive man can keep warm, and it's a fuel source. So during periods of hardship during the winter, he was much more likely to be able to survive. So that to say that 2 month maybe window of time of metabolic syndrome was great, has a great advantage. And in fact, there aren't many mammals that can run on that dual fuel. It's a little bit like a car that can run on diesel and can run on petrol. It has great advantage. Now, what made primitive man go for those sugars and those carbohydrates is probably addiction. Those foods are all very addictive, and we eat them in an addictive way. So once you start eating honey, you can't stop, and have to have more and more. Start eating bananas, can't stop, eat more and more and more. And of course, again, that has evolutionary benefit. You eat a lot of bananas and you're going to get very fat, and that's, I say, totally desirable. But primitive man, he would eventually, that autumn harvest would run out. The bananas went rotten, the honey pot ran out, and he would go back to his traditional hunting diet based on fat and protein. Now, the reason why we tend to eat carbohydrates all the time is because those foods are very addictive, and we can. All those foods are available now all year round, so why not? But they induce metabolic syndrome, weight gain, high blood pressure, diabetes, and all the problems that go with that. So back to primitive man. He went back into ketosis because he had to. Westerners, we should be eating ketogenic diet, but getting into ketosis is difficult. It's difficult because the carbohydrates are addictive. They give us an instant hit, and running on fat, conversely, it's a little bit like running your life on your current bank account or your deposit bank account. Fat is our insurance policy for the future. So the body doesn't like running on fat because it's an evolutionary disadvantage. But of course, primitive man had to. We should be running on fat. We don't have the problems of food supply anymore. But the business of running our body from carbohydrates and starches to running on fat, that change is difficult. I call it the metabolic hinterland. So if you think of that as a journey from running on sugars and carbohydrates to running on fat and fibre, there's a boggy patch you have to go through, which takes about 2 weeks. And it's a difficult window of time of 2 weeks, because you can't get fuel from carbohydrates because you've cut them out, and you can't get fuel from fat because you're yet to be fully keto adapted. The body's engine has yet to change sufficiently so it's running smoothly on fats. But having got there, there are great advantages to be had. And in fact, I've written a book about this, the Paleo-Ketogenic Cookbook, which should be out in a few weeks, I hope. But in there I detail the symptoms that one can expect to see improve when you're fully keto adapted. And the first one is people feel better, they have more energy mentally and they have more energy physically. And I learnt much of this from the athletes, because the endurance athletes, their performance increases markedly when they're in ketosis, when they're running their body on fats. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, they have a large fuel source. I mean, even the top athletes have, maybe at least 10% of fat in their body. So there's a large pantry there, which means they could run back-to-back marathons without having to eat. By converse, the athletes who are running on sugars and carbohydrates, they're having sugary drinks and Mars bars, things in order to keep going. If they don't do that, they hit a wall, as it's called. They run out of fuel at about 17 miles. We call it hitting a wall. The Americans call it bonking, but I think I prefer the former term. So that's the first thing. You have more energy. Second thing is, if you are running the body on sugars and carbohydrates, that is stored as glycogen. It's stored in the liver and it's stored in the muscles. That glycogen has an osmotic pressure, which means it holds water. So when people get into ketosis, they lose 1 or 2 kilograms just like that, and that's just the water that's coming out of their body. Now, that wouldn't make much difference to you or me perhaps, but to a top athlete running a marathon, that makes a big difference. If you're carrying extra couple of kilograms, that's a lot of extra weight that's unnecessary. But there are other things as well, and I always start with the mouth. Teeth go glassy smooth. If you're not eating carbohydrates, the bacteria in the mouth can't ferment there, and you literally starve them out. And if you starve them out, the teeth improve, you lose dental plaque. Dental plaque essentially is biofilm. It's a tough layer that the main bacteria in the mouth, which is Streptococcus mutans, it hides behind that tough biofilm in order that it can make itself at home in your mouth. So the teeth become glassy smooth, gum disease disappear. You don't get a fermenting gut. If you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, there's a tendency for them to be fermented. If you ferment, then you bloat, belch, burp, and have maybe foul-smelling breath. The bacterial flora on the skin changes. So body odour, for example, which I think of as farting skin, body odour disappears and people are ketogenic diet because they're not feeding those bacteria with sugar that's coming out in the sweat. Of course, sweat doesn't smell of anything. It's when the sweat gets fermented on the skin that it produces the foul smell of body odour. So ketogenic diet, that disappears.
And sleep quality.
Yes, indeed. If I took a video of blood sugar levels of somebody eating sugars and carbohydrates, it would look like the Rocky Mountains. Every time they have sugar and carbohydrates, the blood sugar goes up, and then there's an outpouring of insulin because sugar damages arteries, and so blood sugars come down. As blood sugars fall, the brain panics, it thinks it's going to run out of fuel, so it pours out adrenaline, so the blood sugar then comes back up again, but adrenaline causes all the symptoms of anxiety, nervousness, irritability, and it will wake you up. So many of my patients tell me that their sleep quality is much improved when they get into ketosis. And again, on that line, as part of the ketogenic diet, it's much easier to do fasting. And fasting is often a helpful therapeutic tool. And, it reverses metabolic syndrome faster than anything else, one thing. But 1 day a week, I try and have a 24-hour fast. So I have breakfast one day, and then breakfast, and then have nothing until breakfast the next day. And I know that on those fasting days, I sleep so much better. There's some sort of relationship between the brain and the gut as to who burns the fuel and who uses it. But essentially, if the brain is busy, the gut is quiet. If the gut is busy, then the brain is quiet, sort of thing. So there's an interesting relationship there.
So do people perform better on different diets? Is there a one diet formula that everyone should be
Well,
into?
As I say to all my patients, I can give you the rules of the game and the tools of the trade, and you've actually got to go and do it. It's like playing cricket. Cricket has certain rules of the game, but Ian Botham would have a completely different style to Geoffrey Boycott, for example. But they're both very successful cricketers in their own right. And what one eats as a child probably influences, to a certain extent, how the body functions best. But the basic rules are: it should be paleo, i.e. cut out the grains and the dairy products because they are particularly damaging to our health. You've probably seen the book by David Perlmutter called Grain Brain, where he talks about the damaging effects of grains on brain development. And dairy products. Dairy products are meant for young mammals. Dairy products are full of growth promoters. If babies don't grow very quickly, then they get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. So, and dairy products being growth promoting, that's bad news for cancer. If you've got and dairy products are undoubtedly a risk factor for cancer. And again, there are other reasons why we shouldn't be eating dairy products. Again, dairy products increase your risk of osteoporosis. Lots of people can't get their head around that. Oh, dairy products are full of calcium. It should be good for the bones. Well, what is as important as calcium is magnesium. And the proportion we need in their diet is about 1 part calcium to 1 part magnesium. In dairy products, it's 10 parts calcium to 1 part magnesium. So having dairy products induces magnesium deficiency. And magnesium deficiency is a major risk factor for osteoporosis. Dairy products increase the risk of arterial disease and heart disease. They increase the risk of cancer, as we said. They increase the risk of autoimmunity. And then major allergens. The commonest allergen I see in young children and babies is to dairy products. So really we shouldn't be eating dairy products, shouldn't be eating grains, and I'm sure you all know Djokovic avoids wheat. He does a gluten-free diet and maintains that's part of the reason for his success.
Why do you think in Stone Age people tended to die quite young, despite being on this diet or similar diet?
They died of different things. Thankfully, we live in a world now where we don't die of cold, we don't die of starvation, we don't die of disease, we don't die in childbirth, and those were the big killers for primitive man. So his reasons for death were completely different from our reasons for death.
Sure. Could you talk a bit about fasting? I know you've talked a bit about it before, but what would be the effects of fasting in the long run? In the short term, fasting reverses metabolic syndrome quicker than anything else. Why is that?
Because you cut out the sugars and carbohydrates, and you go into fat burning very quickly because you have to.
So there's a strong link to the ketogenic diet.
Yes. Fasting makes us more clever, and again there's some lovely work done with mice and mazes, and or rats and mazes, and their maze solving ability. And if they are given carbohydrates ad lib, they're rather slow and sluggish. And when they are in a state of fasting or in a state of ketosis, they are much better at maze solving. And if you think about this makes perfect evolutionary sense, because we are hunters. And the way that primitive man ate, he would feast and he would fast. So when he had a kill, there'd be an enormous pile of meat and fat which had to be eaten fairly quickly because that's the safest way of storing it. And then there would be no meat and you would have to go and hunt. And if you are in ketosis and fasting, it makes you clever. And if you are clever, you become a better and more efficient hunter. So you can see why fasting would be a stimulus for brain development and more neuronal connections, and in fact that has been well proven.
And what role does exercise have in all this?
Well, we know exercise is good for us. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. But exercise, it will burn sugar. When people are exercising, they will burn sugar preferentially. So blood sugar levels will fall on the exercise, and then we switch into ketosis. So it helps the metabolic switch into ketosis. And yes, it reduces blood sugar levels. So we know that exercise helps with insulin resistance. And the other point, of course, is when we exercise, we sweat. And when we sweat, we detox. And we live in such a toxic world. I often do fat biopsies on patients, and I always find rare pesticides and a rare volatile organic compound. So I always find organic chlorine chemicals. I find dichlorobenzenes, which are flame retardants, which are routinely used in furniture. And we can't avoid those because they are ubiquitous in the environment, but we can keep them at the lowest level that is reasonable. Now, when you exercise and you get hot and you sweat, you literally boil off these toxins from the subcutaneous fat onto the lipid layer on the surface of the skin, and then showering helps to wash them off. So I've now collected over 30 patients now where I've done some sort of measurement of toxicity before and after a sweating regime. Now, exercise is the best and the sweating regime. My sick patients, of course, can't exercise, so they do far-infrared saunering or Epsom salt baths or traditional saunering, or if you've got it, sunbathing, shower after, and the levels of toxin come down reliably well with those sort of heating regimes. So exercise is going to be additionally helpful to detox.
Great. And there's been a lot of confusion surrounding the types of fat. So when you say fat, are you referring to saturated fat, unsaturated, or trans fats?
Okay. The important thing to remember is that in nature, all fats are good. There is no such thing as a bad fat. We have short-chain fatty acids which come from the fermenting gut. So even my horse is in permanent ketosis because he eats grass. It's fermented in the gut to produce short-chain fatty acids. So horses are running on fat. The preferred fuel for humans are medium-chain fats, about 8 carbon fats, which are saturated. Now, at a molecular level, these are short molecules. And they are saturated with hydrogen ions, and that makes them very tough and stiff. So when you cook with them, they retain their structure, they don't change. The other fats we think about are the long-chain oils, which are generally liquid at room temperature, from vegetable oils, nut oils, seed oils, fish oils. Now they are 18, 20, 22 carbon, they're much longer, and they're missing hydrogen ions at the place. And where you miss a hydrogen ion, we call that an unsaturated, and it kinks the molecule. So if you think of my arm as a 22 chain carbon chain oil, it's maybe kinked at 3, we call that an omega-3, it might be kinked at 6, we call that an omega-6, or it might be kinked at 9, in which we call it an omega-3, 6, 9, and that's a poly, more than one, unsaturated. Now, in nature, all those oils are left-handed. They're called cis fats, if you like. But if you heat them or you hydrogenate them, they can flip to a right-handed form, which is called a trans fat. Now that doesn't fit biological enzyme systems, which are all designed to recognise shapes. It's the wrong shape. It clogs up biological enzyme systems and gets in the way and is very damaging to the body. So the key is, eat oils, have your oils, but never heat them, don't hydrogenate them. Drizzle them onto the vegetables, use them in your salad dressing, or just have them off the spoon, but don't cook with them. That's where you get the trans fat. And don't hydrogenate them. That's what happens when you make margarine. Margarine full of trans fats, you don't want to have that.
Sure. Now on to a very important topic. My friend Taz did a recent interview for our channel with a girl at uni who was presenting a case of mental health awareness, and furthering a case of mental health awareness more like. What advice would you give to someone who came to you if they had depression or anxiety or mental health, which is
we are seeing epidemics of mental health problems at the moment here, and in school children, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, hyperactivity, anxiety are rife. And that results largely because of modern eating habits. I mean, our children are the worst carbohydrate addicts that we've ever seen ever in the history of humans. And you look at the quality of their diet, they're having breakfast cereals with fruit juice and toast, which are all high carb foods. They're snacking through the day with cakes and chocolate and sweets. At lunchtime, they're having sandwiches with a piece of fruit and a bag of crisps, and that's considered a healthy lunch, and it absolutely isn't. And then in the evening meal, it's pasta, it's bread, it's potato again. So our children are carbohydrate addicts. If we look at their blood sugar levels, they're going to be up and down and up and down. It's going to be looking like the Rocky Mountains. And every time their blood sugar falls precipitously, the brain panics and pours out adrenaline. And adrenaline is the stress hormone. It's an unpleasant feeling being full of adrenaline. You're anxious, you're wired, you're fired, you're hungry, you're craving. And people satisfy, or they assuage that adrenaline hit by more carbohydrates. We call it comfort eating. When I lived in Nottinghamshire, the comfort food there was a chip butty. So in Scotland, it's probably a deep fried Mars bar. But it makes us crave sweet things and sugary things and carbohydrate things, and perpetuates the whole problem. So the starting point to treat any psychological condition, indeed any brain condition, is the ketogenic diet, because it irons out adrenaline levels, so you're not living on uppers and downers. you sleep better, and good quality sleep again is so important for treating any condition. I mean, I specialise in chronic fatigue syndrome. I invariably ask about sleep, and poor quality sleep alone will result in chronic fatigue. And gut function improves because you're not fermenting carbohydrates anymore, and therefore you're not malabsorbing. And so many cases of irritable bowel syndrome are driven by carbohydrates and sugars. So the ketogenic, it's just so important in all childhood conditions. But it's difficult. It's difficult to do it. It's difficult to persuade the parents of it. In fact, there's a case recently of an Australian doctor who was advocating the ketogenic diet in the treatment of a wide range of conditions. And he was taken to task by his professional body, our equivalent to the Australian General Medical Council. And they told him if he didn't stop advocating the ketogenic diet, he would be struck off. So there is huge resistance within society to the ketogenic diet. And it's perceived, it's cruel, it's dangerous. I mean, the starting point to treat diabetes is the ketogenic diet. But if patients suggest that to their diabetic consultants, it's open war between the two.
Right.
In fact, there's a lovely film being made about the treatment of epilepsy with a ketogenic diet. Again, it's been known since the 1920s that you can cure epilepsy with a ketogenic diet. And a film was made starring Meryl Streep, who was the mum, and a little boy Matthew, and it was about her battles with the medical profession to persuade them to allow her, and goodness me, allow her, is her son, to do a ketogenic diet. It was fantastically successful, and there's a lovely website up now called Matthew's Kitchen, which tells the story. You can get the film and lots of nice recipes as well.
So what kind of diet would you put someone on a day-to-day basis? A brief overview would be great.
Well, I now know without a shadow of a doubt that the paleo-ketogenic diet is the starting point for treating everything. Now, I've been doing this diet for about 18 months, and I now know this is the diet I will stay on for the rest of my life. The reason I've written the cookbook is because when I started going into the paleo-ketogenic diet, there was a certain sense of bereavement there. My lovely bread, I'm going to miss that. All my lovely dairy products, I'm going to miss all that. Never mind, I'd better do it because I'm asking my patients to do this, and I don't ask my patients to do anything that I don't do. Having established it, I now no longer feel bereaved. In fact, I feel rather sorry for people who are eating sugars and carbohydrates. So one advantage of this diet is I only eat twice a day. So I don't have lunch, which means it's one less meal to think about, look in the fridge, put on the table, sit down, eat, clear up afterwards. So it's less work. My breakfast, I have a good old-fashioned fry-up. So I'd have bacon, sausage, eggs, mushrooms. At the moment I've got onions in the garden, so I have fried onions. I'm trying to grow some mushrooms, but I failed. But it's a good old-fashioned fry-up. And then I never get hungry through the day. I never get energy dips. I used to get a bit of a dip after lunch, but of course I don't eat lunch anymore. And that takes me through to the evening meal. And my evening meal is, now, I've developed a recipe for what I call paleo bread. Most people fail on the paleo ketogenic diet because there isn't any bread there. But I've developed a loaf which is based on, it's only 3 ingredients: linseed, salt and water. I can make a loaf now in 5 minutes. It looks like a brown Hovis loaf. It cuts like a brown Hovis loaf. I can make sandwiches with it. It makes very good fried bread, which I have for breakfast. It makes very good toast. So my starter for evening meal will be my linseed bread toast, on which goes pate, smoked fish, tinned fish, olive pate, or something like that. And then main meal is just meat and green vegetables, or salad. And then my pudding will be berries from the deep freeze. And I'm very lucky I've got a deep freeze full of berries, over which I pour coconut milk. Now there's a wonderful coconut milk called Grace coconut milk. The only ingredients are coconut milk and water. It's been beautifully blended and it pours like single cream. From the fridge it pours like double cream. And what I do is I put frozen berries in a bowl, Grace coconut milk over the top, mix it in and put it in the fridge. And the berries freeze the coconut milk. So I end up eating ice cream every pudding. So So I really eat incredibly well.
Amazing. One of the biggest issues I found doing the diet itself, and especially as a young person, as a student, was the social side. Going to parties,
Yes.
21st, being given a meal. What advice would you give? Because obviously this is more to do with organisation than anything.
No, you do. The answer is you do your best. And yes, some carbohydrates will creep in there, but it doesn't matter for the occasional basis. I mean, if fundamentally you are keto adapted, you can switch back into ketosis very, very quickly. So, and of course, primitive man would have feasted, wouldn't he? In the autumn he'd have had a feast. At Christmas he'd have had a feast when he'd saved up his precious grains and his precious pot of honey or whatever. So I don't think the odd feast matters in the slightest. And I would say go and enjoy yourself, eat what you like.
Great. We have a few questions from our audience on YouTube. So one person asked, can a diet high in carbs with a low glycemic index, brown rice and fruit, etc., lead to good health too, as long as you keep the fat low?
My answer is that is not a low GI diet.
That's not a low GI diet.
In the PK Cookbook, Appendix 3 details the carbohydrate content of the common foods. And I do it on the traffic light system. So green is less than 5% carb, 5 to 10% is amber, and then above that is red. Now the green foods that you can have ad lib, things like linseed, which is only 2% carbohydrate. All the green vegetables pretty much, salad are there. Brazil nuts are about 4%, so that's about the only carb you dare have. But cashew nuts is 26% carbohydrate. Now, guess why I love cashew nuts? Because I was getting a carbohydrate hit from them. And give me a packet of cashew nuts. If I start eating them, I'm not happy until the whole packet's gone, because that carbohydrate hit I love. And whereas Brazil nuts, I can have 4 or 5 and I don't want any more. That'll do me. So brown rice, all the grains are above 10%, and brown rice about 20-30% carbohydrate. You're going to get a sugar spike from that. You're going to get a big carb hit. Fruit. The berries are low carb, generally speaking, although they do creep into the amber area. But it's difficult to eat, a huge bowl of berries, whereas it's very easy to eat a whole pineapple or a whole melon, which is, very much in the red category. They're going to be 20, maybe 30% sugar and carbohydrates. So fruit and brown rice is not low carb; it's high carb.
Sure. Our next question is. She's advocating a combination of ketogenic and paleo diet. It would be interesting to know the difference between the two.
Well, paleo essentially means no grains and no dairy. They are relatively modern foods which carry problems. They're major allergens. Dairy is growth promoting. Dairy increases your risk of heart disease. Dairy increases your risk of osteoporosis. Dairy products contain growth promoters. In fact, dairy products are designed for young mammals. If young mammals don't grow very quickly, they get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. And so dairy products are a risk factor for cancer. So dairy products are going to be out anyway. Gluten grains. Gluten is a very strong antigen. So it's a major driver of allergy, and allergy is probably running at least 30, possibly 40% of the population are allergic. So that'd be out. And dairy and grains, of course, are high carbohydrate foods. So that's the paleo bit. The ketogenic bit is very low carbohydrate, running on fats. And so the Atkins diet, for example, is a ketogenic diet, but it allows dairy products, and that gets the no-no. The Atkins diet also allows artificial sweeteners. Now, I think artificial sweeteners are a no-no. I thought about this. But the body's clever. And if something tastes sweet, it knows there's going to be a blood sugar spike coming along behind very, very shortly afterwards. And I think that when you have take sweeteners, and I can't find a study that has proven this. That's because the people who make the sweeteners don't want to see such the results of the study. But my guess is if somebody ate a sweetener, you would get an insulin spike. Because the body is expecting the sugar to come along. And if you get an insulin spike, your blood sugar is going to drop, and that's going to make you hungry and crave. And I think that's the explanation why sweeteners do not help people lose weight. They don't help on calorie-restricted diets. And also, they keep the sweet craving going, which is a bad thing. It keeps you going psychologically. Now, one of the things that I can now say with confidence is that once you cut out the sweeteners and you cut out the sugar, your palate changes. Now, I never thought I would be able to eat blackcurrants with no sweetener on them, but I can eat my frozen blackcurrants with the coconut milk, no problem at all. It doesn't taste sharp to me. In fact, any amount of sweetener on just tastes horribly sweet. So the taste buds do adapt. And in fact, there's a lovely example of this. A dear friend of mine, who's a consultant paediatrician at Chelmsford, his name won't come into my head, but it will in a moment, Alan Franklin. He was interested in allergy. And of course, he was putting his kids on elimination diets. You can't have this, you can't have that. And of course, kids are terrible addicts. They're always going for the sweet things. And they said, oh, well, I don't like this, I don't like that. All right, he said. And with the child's permission, he said, I want you to have a little mouthful of the food you don't like every day, whether it's the avocado pear or the Brussels sprouts or the mushrooms or whatever. And no child had a problem after 14 days, so 2 weeks, a little bit every day, they came to like that food. So the point is, what we like and we don't like is learned. And we learn that by experience. And again, that makes perfect sense. You know, if you're a primitive man trotting through the jungle, you see a new food, a red berry, you think, oh, I'll try a little bit of that. You try a tiny bit of that. And, oh, that was quite nice. And then it didn't make me ill. And next time he goes, oh, I'll have 2 or 3 of those berries. They're rather nice. Now, if he was in the raspberry, okay, he's learned raspberries are good and he can eat them. If it was a red berry that was from a deadly nightshade or something, and he might be made very ill by that and say, do you know what? I'm not going near that one. So it's part of the learning process. It's how we learn to eat the safe foods.
And what advice would you give to someone in the initial stage of transition from carbohydrate to ketogenic?
Just do it.
Just do it.
Yeah. Don't. One of the quotes in the book is from David Lloyd George, who said, if you've got to jump a chasm, you can't do it in 2 small jumps. You've got to do it in 1 big leap. So you just take 1 big leap, take a leap of faith, and just do it. Now, obviously, choose a window of time in your life where you're not, got a big party the next day, or you've got other demands on your time. But once you get into it, and the pantry becomes stocked with the right thing, and the deep freezer becomes stocked with the right thing, and you're not craving, and it becomes easy.
So there's no slow transition. There's no cutting on carbs. Or,
I think that makes it more difficult. I have yet to have a patient who's done that, but it may be that fasting is the quickest way to get into ketosis, because you do. But there's still the metabolic hinterland. I reckon is about 2 weeks before you really get into it, and then it's no bother at all.
And we also have a comment by a lady claiming that she followed the ketogenic diet and she has severe CFS, however, not much seemed to help. Okay,
well, if she's got chronic fatigue, there may be another aspect here. But the first thing is, if people say to me they're getting worse on the paleo-ketogenic diet, the first thing I say, tell me exactly what you are actually eating, because it might not be ketogenic. And it starts off, bacon, eggs for breakfast, and then suddenly the pulses are slipping in. Lentils. I can have quinoa, can't I? That's high in protein. That's good. No, they are all high carb foods. So that's why it's really important to ask people exactly what they are eating. That's the first thing. The second thing is that to be able to fat burn, you need thyroid hormones, and hypothyroidism in chronic fatigue syndrome is very common. So if they really are doing the ketogenic diet truly, properly, well and honestly, and they're not getting the benefit, the next thing I'll be looking at will be their thyroid hormones. Because you need thyroid hormones for fat burn. How do I know that? When somebody is thyrotoxic, they're pathologically high on thyroid hormones, they have amazing amounts of energy, they're hot, and the weight just drops off them because they're in dramatic ketosis. And the conversely, if you're underactive, you're hypothyroid, you cannot fat burn because you haven't got the thyroid hormones to do that. And so however much people restrict their calories and try to keep, the weight just doesn't come off.
Great. And how do you measure whether you're in ketosis?
Urine test is a nice cheap method of doing it. It doesn't always show, especially in women. They often don't pee pink. Let me get that right. You have little test strips that you pee onto, and if you're in ketosis, they go a pink, purple colour. That, or you can do the same for blood, and you can get kits that you can buy online, and you can prick your finger, and that will tell you if you're in ketosis or not. Now, the kits themselves are quite cheap. The testing strips are rather expensive. They're about £1 each, so that's a bit tiresome. But if you really want to prove that you're in ketosis, that's the way to do it. But the symptoms are very, very clear. People, you don't get hungry, you don't run out of fuel during the day, you don't get uppers and downers, your sleep is better, your teeth go glassy smooth, your gut symptoms settle down. There are lots of other clinical clues that tell you you're in ketosis.
And more specifically, what levels? Is it mild ketosis?
It's not important.
Not important.
If you're producing any ketones at all, then you're burning fat.
Yeah.
So I don't, yes, if you went if you went running and exercising heavily, then your levels of ketones would be higher. But the point is, you're burning fat. Once you're at any amount of ketosis and you're fat burning, you've arrived.
Great. And what are your views on caffeine?
I don't think it's the awful drug that some people make it out to be, and I think caffeine taken judiciously helps improve mental performance. But I love caffeine, and the way I do it is I just have a very little cup, I don't have any after about 2 p.m. The thing to remember about caffeine, it's got quite a long half-life, and if you're a slow detoxifier and you have caffeine in the evening, it'll disrupt your sleep, something awful. Lots of people know this from practice, from experience. But I think a little bit of caffeine is fine. I'm not worried about that.
Great. And lastly, we've had a lot of interest in your new cookbook. When is it out, and what will it be talking about?
Well, it's called the Paleo-Ketogenic Cookbook, and it details my journey, if you like, from fats, from sugars and starches to fat and fibre, and how I do it. So in there are details of how to do it, why we should be doing it, the dairy substitutes, and I've now got delicious yogurts, delicious creams, delicious ice creams, which are all non-dairy but just as good as the bread substitutes, and I've got a recipe in there for paleo-ketogenic bread, which is very easy to make. It took me 6 months to get it right, but there are only 3 ingredients, which is linseed, salt and water, and it makes something that looks like a brown hovis that you can slice. You can make toast with it, you can make sandwiches with it, you can make fried bread with it. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then all the other foods that are possible, the fermented foods, suggestions for breakfast, suggestions for main meals, suggestions for starters, how water fits into all this, the different sorts of fats, everything that you need to know to do a good paleo-ketogenic diet. And I know the things you need to know because I've asked all those questions of myself over the past 18 months, and the book has slowly evolved during that time. So I'm very pleased with it. I think it's a very practical guide that really everybody can follow.
Great. And you've also got a new book out, because obviously we can't talk about everything here, and you're an incredibly busy lady. So.
That's very nice of you to but it's my first book that I've rewritten, basically detailing the physical basis of chronic fatigue syndrome and ME. And fatigue, in a nutshell, fatigue is the symptom we experience when energy demand exceeds energy delivery. It's obvious. It's the Mr. McCormick equation, income 20 shillings, outgoing 21 shillings, result misery, outgoing 19 shillings, result happiness. So we have to look at energy delivery mechanisms and how the body is generating energy, which has to do with diet, paleo-ketogenic diet, mitochondrial function. Mitochondria is the engine that burns that fuel to make energy, thyroid, which is the accelerator pedal of our car, if you like, adrenal glands, which is the gearbox of our car. So that's all about energy delivery. And then on the other side, we have to look at how energy is being spent in the body. Now, we spend about 2/3 just staying alive, basal metabolism, and we should spend the rest on physical things and on mental things. But there are 2 common holes in that energy bucket. One is the emotional hole, but the big problem is what I call the immunological hole in the energy bucket. Now, chronic fatigue syndrome arises, I call that's all about energy delivery mechanisms are down. ME is all about the inflammatory hole in the energy bucket. And ME is caused by chronic fatigue plus inflammation, which might be chronic infection like chronic Lyme disease, or chronic Epstein-Barr virus, or chronic fermenting gut, or chlamydia or whatever. So there's a lot more detail here about the myalgia and encephalitis side, i.e. the inflammatory hole in our energy bucket.
Great. Well, you've been absolutely incredible as well, again, and I really do hope to see you again soon and do this again.
My pleasure. Whenever you like, you're very welcome to come over.
Maybe we can finally get Taz over.